Poinsettia, Chapter 25. The next day, early in the afternoon, Danny was out in the back courtyard of the hospital, humming as she rolled a big snowball and then stopped to wipe her forehead, despite it being hidden under her hat. "Whew, Bumblebee, this is hard. They really get heavy when they're big." She peered down at the bear sitting in the snow. In front of him was a teeny tiny snowman with the bear's dress-up clothes, mostly a scarf, a hat, mittens on the twigs, and little pebbles. She glared at the bear dressed in his warm winter clothes. "Show off." In reality, she had made his snowman first, and then set to work on her much bigger one. Ah, the joys of a child's imagination. Suddenly, voices caught her attention. She looked around for the location of which they would be coming. She bent down and picked up Bumblebee and held him close. "What's that?" She peered down at his lifeless face. "Let's go find out, okay?" She then nodded the bear's head. She then headed towards the sound. They were coming from behind the stables, which housed the horses for the carts. But these were indeed voices, not the sound of idle horses. Slowly Danny peeked her head around the stable and saw two men. She recognized them from the boardroom. One was the mean and loud Lord McCarran. The other was the former vice president, the really scary Mr. McLaughlin. What were they doing here? Was there a meeting this morning? But didn't they always meet in the evening? She knew why. If Gavin was going to attend the meetings, they had to be at night for the vampire. So if they were meeting in the day, it had to be something Gavin knew nothing about. "Absolutely absurd. I've been with this board for many years," Mr. McLaughlin stated. "Never has anything like this happened before." "At least you were dismissed before such a humiliating display could be done before you," Lord McCarran replied. "And to think that those traitors blame me for everything. They just don't understand good business tactics. If you want to be the most powerful and feared, you have to instill that in others." "No chance of that now." "Has he made this decision public?" "I don't feel so," Lord McCarran said. "I think it's only between us, given the circumstances." "Then there's still a chance the board can come together again and readjust after New Year's," Mr. McLaughlin stated with certainty. "I don't understand. Lord McIntyre would never allow that. Everyone is too afraid of him to go against his decision, although I can't understand why. He seems like a man that is all bark and no real action. A big bluffer." "Perhaps. But if Lord McIntyre is not there to argue, who is to stop us?" "Is he going away again?" "So long as he's alive, he won't." Lord McCarran let out a gasp. "Are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" Mr. McLaughlin gave a wicked smile. "What if we kill Lord McIntyre?" "How do you propose we do that?" "He is a very predictable man. He has a habit of taking the same trails every few nights on his way to the cemetery. He's done it for many years. It would be easy to pick him off." "Do you know what night he'd be going?" "That, I'm afraid, is the least predictable part. Sometimes it can be every few days, and sometimes it's every couple weeks. And sometimes it could be once or twice a month. It all depends, I suppose." "So how do we get him to go there? Do we just sit and wait every night?" Lord McCarran asked. "It would look suspicious, would it not?" "Then we'll have to think of something." "How will we explain it?" "There's that crazy murderer growing around, isn't there?" Mr. McLaughlin chuckled. "The one who killed Mr. Borders, and the O'Brien boy." He gave Lord McCarran a push. "Just don't miss this time." "Get off my back. It was impossible to see through that heavy snowfall," Lord McCarran growled. "Small chance of hitting anything other than a tombstone or an unfortunate man in that cemetery." "Are you game, then?" "What do we do after he's dead?" "Simple, Leopold, old friend. We call up the board and have them reassemble. If they will not, then we simply appoint new members. We then close the hospital and dump these brats somewhere else. Let them rot in the workhouses for all I care. Then we turn this place into the most profitable establishment we can imagine." "Sounds absolutely delicious. A real Christmas present to us greedy old men," Lord McCarran chuckled. Imagine an upscale shopping center, something big that constantly brings in reliable revenue. Hospitals cannot refuse care, so even those poor children get to rot there, leeching away our monies. Does this sound appealing? I think it sounds perfect, Alistair. Now it's just a matter of working out the fine details. A little sneeze caught their attention. They both spun around, not seeing anything. What was that? A jail sentence if we don't find it, Mr. McLaughlin hissed. Go around that way. They split up, coming around either side of the stables. Danny gasped and held the bear close. We have to get out of here, Bumblebee. She knew she couldn't go inside. They'd know where to get her. We have to tell Mr. Gavin and Mr. Angus what's happening. With that, she began to run. Leopold is a brat, Mr. McLaughlin shouted. Get her! Both of them ran to chase her. She had the head start and youth on her side. For the moment. She didn't look back and came around the castle and out of the front gates. She could hear them huffing and puffing behind her. She could gauge their distance that way. However, she didn't really know the roads very well. She had only been to the cemetery and to Gavin's home once, and it was on Angus's back, making the world go by fast. She had to stop to figure out which way to go. She wasn't sure she could run the whole way to Gavin's mansion, besides the fact that he wouldn't be awake. But Mr. Angus was a very strong werewolf. He'd be able to protect her. Her last stop to gauge direction was what allowed the two men to catch up to her, grabbing onto her and pulling her as she screamed. Come here, you little brat, Lord McCarran growled, yanking her up by her arm, making her drop the bear onto the road. Her kicking and flailing was too much for one man, but both men were able to subdue her. What did you hear, you little trollop? Mr. McLaughlin roared. Let me go, Danny screamed. Let me go. I'm not going to let you hurt Mr. Gavin. He's really tough. She then bit down on Lord McCarran's hand. He let out a yell and released her, giving her a chance to run a little further before being yanked up by Mr. McLaughlin. You're not going anywhere. He flipped her around and looked into her tearful, chilly pink and horribly pouted face and hard eyes. She had guts. That was admirable, even to an old crank like himself. So you were going to run off to Lord McIntyre and blab like the child you are. You heard every word, didn't you? You're not going to hurt him, or the other kids. I'll tell everyone what mean and bad men you are, Danny threatened. Leopold, I think we have a way to have Lord McIntyre come to us. He has a soft spot for these kids. You think he'd come for her, Alistair? If not, he has the death of a child on his hands. You're so stupid, Danny shouted. He won't come. He would never come out in the daytime. He doesn't like to come out before nighttime. Is that so? Well, are you worth that inconvenience? Mr. McLaughlin chuckled. You don't scare me, Danny spat. You can't scare me. Oh, no, Lord McCarran chimed in. How about the Grim Reaper, little lass? Not even the Grim Reaper. He'll be coming for me anyway. This threw the two men for a loop. Well, so much for trying to intimidate her. Lord McCarran was the one to finally speak. I still think it's worth testing his loyalty to the children of St. Raphael. You'll be sorry when he finds out, she assured. He'll rip you limb from limb. He's really big and strong. He'll chew you up and spit you out. You make him sound like some sort of vampire or cannibal, Mr. McLaughlin laughed. Danny got very quiet a moment, settling down. Has she said too much? Is that it? Is that Lord McIntyre's secret? Is he some sort of cannibal? He wouldn't do that. Is he a vampire? Lord McCarran joked. But when no reply came from Danny, he frowned. He is, isn't he? I always thought that fool was some crazy witch doctor or pagan. He's in league with the forces of darkness. There's no such things as vampires. Even a kid my age knows that, you stupid heads. Yet you got awfully quiet. Whether he's like the vampire in folklore or some sick man, it's obvious that he's a freakish man. And we'll have to insult him on his own turf to call him out. You better hope he comes for you, lass, Mr. McLaughlin said simply. Otherwise we'll kill you too. One less brat in the world is fine with me. You said it yourself. You're not afraid to die. Danny began to struggle as they dragged her off towards the cemetery. Still, they held tight onto her. They may have been old men, but they were grown men compared to her tiny and weakened body, frail from size and sickness. She had no idea just what they'd do to her, but she was sure it was not going to be good and that lives were going to end that night. She cried out now and then, but it had become obvious none would help her. Eyes fell on her as more of a bratty child carried off by a stern grandparent and parent. Besides, her lungs just grew too tired to keep howling for the hope of rescue. She put that energy, what little of it remained, and continued to squirm in the grasp of these men. Eventually that too ceased. She was just too small, too tired, too weak, too cold. There was nothing she could do. She battled with the notion of rescue, and if she even wanted it. If Gavin came for her, he would be in danger, especially now that these men knew his secret. It would be her fault. She had let the secret slip out, and it would be her neck he had come to save. They'd both die. Yet, if he never came, it would almost hurt, as she'd never be able to see him again, and she would not be that important to him. Still, he'd be able to continue on to do as he needed. She was nobody. She was on death's doorstep anyway. She could easily sacrifice herself for him, and there would be no loss to him or this world. She was just one orphan girl. This resignation finally settled within her. She wouldn't fight anymore. What would be, that's what would be. She accepted her defeat with dignity.